Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming.
Good morning, and you're very welcome to another Signpost Series webinar. Today we'll be discussing the FarmPEAT EIP, overview and key learnings. And I suppose the one thing we have to remember is that our bogs are an important part of the Irish landscape and provide many ecosystem services. Many farmers have land on peatland soils, but what can be done to support them to maintain and improve the local environment? And we're delighted to be joined by Caroline Lalor, FarmPEAT Project Manager, and Bernie Duffy, a local farmer who's also working on the project. Good morning, Caroline. Good morning, Bernie. How are you keeping?
Morning, Cathal.
Morning, Cathal.
And we're also joined by Teagasc Countryside Management Specialist, who you'll all know, Keena, who's going to help me out with questions today. Catherine, how are you keeping?
Morning, how are you all?
Good,
Hi,
good. All well done your way?
All good.
Yeah, excellent. And I suppose, Caroline and Bernie, just to kick off before we get into the presentation, maybe you'll tell us a little about yourselves. Maybe, Caroline, can you give us a little bit of a rundown of what you get up to and what you're about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an ecologist by training, and I suppose I was the project manager on the FarmPEAT project for almost 4 years. And I have a huge interest in bogs myself and farming as well. So I was very interested in the project.
Excellent. And Bernie, how about yourself? How did you get tied up or involved in this?
Well, I'm a farmer, farm 48 acres outside Munstravan in County Kildare, but I got involved in a community project that looked to develop an amenity on our local bog. So to strengthen our case for getting a lease off board Nimona, we decided that we'd reach out to FarmPEAT and ask them if they would actually like to consider our local bog as one of their project sites. And lo and behold, I got drawn into the project, and I've been a team member for the last 3.5 years.
Lovely. What type of farming do you do, Bernie?
Over the years, I've probably chopped and changed a little bit, but at the moment I harvest hay during the summertime and I fatten store lambs during the winter.
Ah, super. So, Caroline, I think you're going to kick off first. So if you would like to get your slides ready.
Thanks very much, first of all, to Teagasc for having us on the Signpost webinar. We're delighted to be here presenting an overview basically of the FarmPEAT project. So the project is actually finished. We started in April 2021 and we finished last December. So I suppose it's a good time to just reflect on it. So myself and Bernie are going to present obviously today, but I just want to acknowledge that we were working as part of a team. We had Laura Daly, Katie Smirnova as well, were key members of the team, and their predecessors, Emma Byrne and Paddy Malone. We also had a team of partners. All the EIPs are partnerships. So our lead partner was Wetland Surveys Ireland. Obviously hugely involved at the start of the project in terms of the setting the aims and objectives, and huge support all the way throughout the project as well. Irish Rural Link were great partners as well and gave us a home in Moat in their offices. We're partners also with Community Wetlands Forum, Umeras Community Development, and O'Connor Pine, the accountants. Very important job getting the payments out. So I'm going to give an overview of the project and the supporting actions and the payments to the farmers, and then Bernie will jump in with more detail on farmer training and our public outreach campaign. So when we started the project, we basically had two main aims. The first aim is all to do with the results-based agri-environmental scheme that we were trialling with our farmers. And then the second aim is basically increasing awareness of the issues. So, the awareness of the importance of the raised bogs themselves and the peat soils that are adjacent to the raised bogs and how we manage them. We're based in the Midlands. We had 8 project sites across the Midlands, and all of the farms were in close proximity to the raised bogs and had land on peat soils. So this is one of our project sites. It's Dangan Bog in County Offaly. And I suppose I have this photo up here. It's an aerial shot, obviously. And when you're looking down at it, it can look like the bog there in the middle is your peat soil, and it's very distinct and separate from the surrounding land, which is mostly agriculture and a bit of forestry. But when I turn on the peat soil layer, which is this kind of shaded area here, you can see that the peat soil actually extends out from the high bog. So that's telling us that the bog used to be bigger. Some of this agricultural and forestry land has been converted from high bog, essentially, or the transitional areas around the edges of the high bog, and converted into other uses like agriculture. And so there's, I suppose, two reasons that we were very keen to work with these farmers here along the edges of the bog. if we can work with those farmers to make those soils wetter, and we'll talk about this throughout the rest of the presentation, but if we can work with them to make those soils wetter and keep the water level up, it's going to help the conservation status of these high bogs, which are they all need help, unfortunately, all the high bogs in Ireland, all the raised bogs. So that was one reason, to try and help the condition of these bogs and help them to store more carbon. But also, we know that these peat soils under grassland are also emitters of greenhouse gases. So that was one of our key aims, to try and work with farmers to see, can we do something to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from these peat soils? And obviously then the co-benefits are going to be biodiversity enhancement and water quality as well. So we've those three main aims all the way through: reducing our emissions, increasing our biodiversity, and water quality as well. We used a results-based approach, and I think most people now are fairly familiar with the results-based approach. It's become more mainstream. It's in acres now, especially the farmers that are in the cooperative project areas. In the Midlands, we're not in a cooperative project area. We're in the general acres, but still there is some results-based there. I think farmers are very au fait with results-based anyway. Bernie's a sheep farmer there. He mentioned if he brings his sheep or his lambs to the mart, and I tried to farm as well and brought mine, he'd get a better price if his sheep are in better condition. He's got a better result, and I'd get a lower payment. So it's very like that. We're basically scoring or assessing the quality of nature on a farm, and we're paying more for the higher quality and less for the lower quality. So farmers see it as fair, and it's something, I suppose, that they're familiar with as well. This is just our payment rate. So you can see that our payments rate go from €0 per hectare if the score is 0 up to a score of 10, which is our maximum score, and that's our maximum payment, €450 per hectare. So basically, it's very straightforward. You score the land. The higher the score, the higher the payment, and that score is reflecting the quality on the ground. So it sounds fairly straightforward. We use these scorecards to get the score. We used a kind of a whole farm approach. So we didn't just score the peat soils, we scored the whole farm: boundaries, tree lines, hedgerows, woodlands, peatlands, all the kind of main habitats. But anything on peat got scored. So even if it was a rye grassland, if it was on peat, we scored it. All these scorecards are available on our website as well, if you want to look at them in more detail. And we used an app that's just, increasing the efficiency of the data collection and processing. Hugely, hugely important. I'll just look at the wet grassland scorecard in a little bit more detail. I suppose it's kind of our key one, because we were focusing a lot, obviously, on the peat soils and grasslands on peat in particular. So most of our scorecards have these 3 sections. The first section is based on the ecology of the site, the types of plants that are there, and the quality of the vegetation structure. Section B then is hydrology, and that's very important in our peat soils, obviously. Section C is our damaging activity. So this is where you could lose points for any damaging activities that are going on the plot. But the hydrology, I suppose that's where we made our main changes, or our main innovation to the scorecard. A lot of work went into designing the scorecard to get it right, and we consulted with other experts in scorecards and results-based projects in Ireland and abroad. And we were obviously building on other EIP projects that had developed scorecards as well. But what we did was, we knew, obviously, the wetter your peat soil is, the lower your emissions are going to be, the more likely you're going to have your wetland plants that you'd find in wet grassland. And we wanted to make sure that those were getting a lot of weighting in the scoring. So we gave 50% of the points to the hydrology section, and that would have differed, like a lot of the other grassland EIP projects that weren't focusing on peat. They mightn't have given any score to hydrology, or I think 30% was the highest we came across. So we upped that to 50%. It's a great way of communicating to farmers as well. All our farmers got trained up in these scorecards, and they can see exactly, like, if they've no wetland indicating species in their wet grasslands, and the drains are deep and the water is flowing freely off the plot, you're getting minus points there, and it's clear what you have to do then to get higher points. Supporting actions, obviously a huge part of the project. Really, really important to be able to support farmers to put in actions to increase their score, and hence increase their payment. And again, it's all about increasing the quality on the ground. So they're voluntary measures. That's really important as well. No farmer was obliged to actually do any supporting actions, but if they wished, they had the option of accessing a supporting actions fund, which would help support the costs of actions. the costs or the funding varied from 25% of the cost to 100%. All of the re-wetting actions were 100% funded, and then it just depended on the kind of proportion of environmental benefit as to the proportion of the other funding. I'm using this example here. This was one that was taken up quite a lot, water quality protection actions. So where we had a farmer maybe with a water course which wasn't fenced off, and if stock were accessing that water, we had 50% funding available for fencing, for troughs and piping, anything they needed to make an alternative water supply for the stock, and fence off the watercourse to protect it. So that was a kind of an important one. And I suppose important to note as well, we have a whole farm assessment scorecard, which basically assesses the peat soil condition and risk to watercourses. And if this was being scored by the FarmPEAT project, they would see a 40% reduction on their overall payment. So it's quite a significant reduction. It can relatively easily be rectified with 50% funding as well available to them. And the next year then they're going to see 100% of their payments coming in. So it was one that was taken up. We saw the percentage of farms that were presenting risk to watercourses reduce from 26% to 17% over the course of the project, and that was basically as a result of farmers taking up those the funding and the actions, or implementing the actions, I should say. So this, just to give you a brief overview, I suppose, of the different types of actions that were completed during the project. Over 50% watercourse protection, almost a third there peat restoration, and then some smaller numbers completing invasive species control. We had rhododendron on one of the farms, and improving habitat quality as well. So just, I suppose, a little bit about payments, which is very important, obviously. Results-based payments to our farmers over the 4 years of results-based payments, 360,000. Supporting actions, quite significant as well, 120,000 nearly. And then there was other payments for training or hosting groups on their farms, etc., and that's about 55,000. So in total, just over 500,000 paid out to farmers over the 4 years. We had 56 farmers in total, I suppose, over the course of the 4 years, and that was 75% of the available funding available. These are our max and our min. So any one farmer, the maximum payment was 11,000, minimum payment 39, but we always bumped up any payment to a minimum of 800 euros, and average about 2,400. So that's kind of just to give you an idea of the average payments. The average payment per hectare then is 670 euros per hectare. That's including everything now. That's results based and supporting actions, etc. I should say here as well that, a really important aspect of the results-based payments is that a farmer will get paid, in the first year. It's not that they have to do an action to get a payment or to get a high score. If the peatland or the wet grassland is in really, really good condition, without them actually doing any actions, they're going to get that high score and that high payment. And that's really important in terms of rewarding farmers for maintaining habitats. It's not about, I suppose, incentivizing someone to drain it and then pay them to improve it. And that's, I think, really, really important going forward in this area. I suppose just to get into a little bit about the dams as well, and what we talk about re-wetting or peat restoration or managing the water table. It's what we did in the FarmPEAT was we worked with the farmers to come up with a plan that they were happy with. So the farmer decided basically how much they wanted to raise that water table or the water level in the drains, and whatever they decided, we worked with that. So it could have been raising it up by 30 centimeters, but still staying 30 or 40 centimeters below the surface. And then the other key thing is it was partial damming. So it wasn't completely blocking the water flow. It was still allowing the water to flow off and flow through the drains. You can see there, this is a plastic dam that was installed on one of our farms in Raheenmore, and the water is still flowing here. This notch in the middle of the plastic dam is setting the level of the water. Here's a peat dam being constructed, and you can see there's a pipe going through. So the water will flow through here and it'll go through the dam and out the other side. So again, we're not blocking it. It's partial damming, and this is the level that's setting the water level. The other key thing here is, that working with experienced contractors and trained contractors is very, very important. and this kind of specialized machinery. There's a lot of work that goes into planning this, obviously, as well. We worked with hydrologists, RPS consultants provided us with a lot of support and advice. And there's also a sequence of steps that needs to be followed when you're installing the dams, and we have that outlined in a document actually, which will be available on our website. And that's really important as well, not to skip steps in the sequence. So there you go. It was a learning curve for us and our farmers and the contractors as well. Just wanted to highlight these two things that RPS worked with us on. The first is this hydrology assessment scorecard. So we asked RPS, is there a way that we can kind of simplify things a little bit and identify easily the sites where we're going to need, more hydrological expertise input? And is it possible that there are sites maybe where we wouldn't need that? So it's a kind of a traffic light approach and a set of relatively simple questions. We got training from RPS, and basically it'll just help identify those sites that need a lot of hydrological expertise. This is an example over here. Then the blue colouring shading on the map is a depression analysis model, which RPS had already for the high bog, and then they have adapted that for use on the edges or the agricultural land of the high bog. It does need further work to make sure that it is very accurate. It's being trialed in the FarmPEAT project, and it still needs to be sort of verified, but it was of huge use. So what it's doing is the dark blue colours there are showing us, they're predicting where the water level after the dams have gone in. It's predicting where the water level will be within 50 centimetres of the surface. And obviously that's very important for us to be able to know where the water level is going to be at that level for the farmer who's putting in the dams, and obviously for neighbouring landowners as well. So in this case, there's about 14 or maybe 18 dams, I think, actually went into this farm. But when we had this map from RPS and we talked to this neighbouring landowner, so here's the farmer's land that's putting in the dams, here's the neighbouring landowner, and we showed him this, and he said no, he'd rather this would not happen on his land. So we went back to RPS and we said, okay, which dams do we need to adjust or take out to remove this impact? And they did their research and told us which dams we needed to take out. And that was the way we did it then. So it's hugely valuable when talking about neighbouring landowners. Costs then, I suppose. So we had 7 farmers implement rewetting actions, rewetting an estimated 7 hectares. Total cost, so including fencing any of the drains that were, had dams installed, or the partial dams, we fenced them off as well, 100% funded that. And then there was training as well for the farmers. So including all those costs, you're talking 47,000 euros. Just for the dam installation, 31,000. Mostly peat installed, but some plastic, and the plastic is very expensive. So when we could use peat, we used peat, but if we had to use plastic, we used the plastic. And then the cost per hectare. So an average total cost, again, including the fencing and the training, 7,600 euros per hectare. And then just for the dams, you're talking about 4,700 per hectare. Just wanted to quickly look at this. So this is another depression analysis model that RPS did, and it was for a site where we had 6 dams installed, and a local farmer was trained up to monitor the water level before and after the dams went in. So here you can see there's a piezometer at A and a piezometer at B, and the farmer went out every Saturday, I think was his routine, but every week he went out and he measured the water table there religiously, and that meant we were able to produce this lovely graph. So here you can see in October 2022 he started measuring. The dams didn't go in until February the following year. So we have some pre-dam installation data here where the water level is down here at 78, nearly 73 centimetres below the surface. Okay, it's fluctuating a good bit, but between 50 and 70 centimetres below the surface. This line represents the dam installation, and you can see the water level jumps right up, and it stays pretty steady there between 25 and we'll say 42 centimetres below the surface. So that's great data to have to show that the water table adjacent, about a metre in anyway from the drain, was jumped up and sustained for this time anyway. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Bernie.
Okay, so I suppose key to delivering the FarmPEAT project really was knowing where the peat soils are. And for this, we used existing peat mapping, and in particular the quaternary sediment soil map developed by Teagasc. So we would head to these areas and we would measure the depth of peat using a probe. And we would record this on GIS so that we could actually look back at it on a map again. So as you see here, with all the dots, they're color coded. So green is to identify where there's no peat, and the darker colors then are where the deepest peat. Now this is a bit of a pep map because we only developed this towards the very end of the project, and you will see the density of dots in a particular area, and that's done on a 25-meter grid. And the purpose for this really was to actually show where the very deepest peat was. Generally, on the initial survey, we were only showing you up to 1 meter deep, but in this map, we're showing the darkest colors are over 3 meters in depth. So where that might come in valuable, maybe in another project or in time to come, would be to identify where the deepest peat were, and maybe to steer farmer towards where putting in the dams would be most valuable in terms of reducing emissions. So we also soil sampled, and in terms of soil sampling, we would use DPA standard of greater than or equal to 20% organic carbon as what we would consider to be, less than or up to that as peat. So there is an international standard of 17%, and then less than 17% we don't consider peat. So as we show on this map here, the dark color is the 20% one that we would use, whereas the salmon colored is 17%, and pink, even though it identifies as peat on the mapping, we don't consider that peat anymore because it comes in at less than 17% organic carbon. So it was quite usual to come across farmland where there was up to maybe 4 meters of peat. It's hard to believe, really, especially when you look at a field like this, and you'd say perfect field of grass, couldn't possibly be peat, but actually there's 4 meters of peat in areas of this field. So project participation and overview. But by the end of the project, we had 53 farmers in total across the 8 project sites, and the total area covered was 1,341 hectares. The average farm size in the project was 25.3 hectares. And when you consider that the national average is 34.7, that would show you that the average farm size was smaller, and that would actually lend itself to the last statistic there, which is 51% full-time farmers, 49% part-time farmers, pretty much an even split there in terms of full-time and part-time farmers that took part. And I suppose most importantly is our direct engagement with the farmers. And each year we would have a training day. And this would actually primarily be basically to keep farmers up to date on the latest science around grass on peat and how to manage it. It was also great for getting farmer feedback and for farmer to farmer for training and knowledge exchange. And then very often, like I said, this is in farm sheds where farmers themselves are quite comfortable. But then we would go out onto the fields, and Caroline would demonstrate the scorecards. So farmers would actually get to see firsthand what they're being scored on and where the positive areas were and where they would lose money if they didn't come up to scratch. So knowledge exchange, very important. Like I said, it's delivered in the field very often. And then also we use the satellite imagery that Caroline would have shown earlier in terms of what looks like peat, what we would instantly recognize as peat. And then also that farmland surrounding the bog, which is under grass, and nobody really considers that. So it is a source of emissions, and one of the animations that we would use to actually demonstrate this is that on deep drained peat, the emissions can be up to 27 tons of CO2 per hectare per year, and this equates to 4 family cars. So this is a way of demonstrating it where people can relate to it very quickly in terms of what the emissions might actually amount to. Now this is one of our favorite slides when it comes down to presentations, and it gets everybody's attention. So basically the carbon storage of an intact raised bog that's greater than 4.5 meters deep versus the Amazon rainforest, We all consider the Amazon rainforest to be one of our greatest natural resources on the planet in terms of sequestering carbon dioxide. But people are quite staggered when they realize that the Amazon rainforest contains less than 500 tons of carbon per hectare compared to over 3,000 tons on a healthy raised peat bog. So it's something that grabs people's attention they wouldn't have thought about before. So what's the actual value of reducing or raising the water table? As you see, it's quite important in terms of, excuse me, for every 10 centimeter of water table increase, 3 tons of CO2 emissions are sequestered or decrease. So if you go along and you apply that to the 2024 update, raising the water table by 20 centimeters over 120,000 of drained peat grassland identified by Teagasc would reduce 720,000 tons of CO2 each year, and that equates to 1.3% of our national emissions. So even raising the water table by what's considered to be a fairly small amount actually has a huge effect on the levels of emissions that are coming off drained peat. So this is one of the slides that we also use. It's probably a monument that people would have been familiar over the years with if they were passing on the N7. This is a peat monument outside Portlaoise, and it was put there in basically 1997. But as time passed by, it degraded. CO2 was emitted from it, and by 2020, it was gone completely. So it's just something that people who can see immediately that peat does disappear if it's exposed to oxygen. And this is just in the field. You can actually see this is a slide from Somerset in England, where these pylons were put down, and you can see how since 1960 how much the ground has subsided, and this would have been through oxidization and emissions and maybe sediment being washed away by rain as well. So you would see this quite a lot on farms as you go around, in particular in around gate posts and that would have been put down maybe in peat soils and cemented in. And now you will see that the foundation for these posts is actually exposed just as they are with these pylons. So it is happening. So during our training days, farmers will be surveyed each year on their ideas of around farming on peat soil, and farmers would have been asked, did they think it was possible to continue farming if the drains were blocked? So initially in 2021, on the first survey, only 18% agreed on that. But by the time 2024 came along, after the farmers had actually seen dams in working and that the land itself hadn't been impacted, you had 42%, which was, I think, quite an increase. And obviously on the day, farmers were asked other questions as well. Maybe most of them didn't change that much in terms of their opinion. But I think one that was interesting was the last one there. Are you in favour of turf cutting immediately or within 5 years? So there was a 4% increase in that. So maybe there is some traction in that area. Knowledge exchange, like I said, this is really important in terms of what we do. And basically farmers themselves come along then and they give us their opinions on how they feel the knowledge that we passed on to them in the project was of value to them. So we have some of their comments here, and this one here probably is my favorite. I think projects like FarmPEAT are best way to bring farmers on board and educate them on what needs to change and why things need to be done differently. And I think that's the message really we're trying to get across in the project. So public outreach was a significant part of the project, and in particular the Love Your Wellies initiative. This basically was reaching out to schools. We engaged with 1,500 students through workshops and field trips and webinars. In particular, the Love Your Wellies art competition was a huge success. It had 800 entries over the years, 3 years of the competition, and it was a great way of getting young people interested in all things peatlands, basically. And some of the entries were outstanding in the effort that they put into them. In fact, because of the site visits or school visits that we would have done, we were awarded Prep Soil Best Teaching Practice for 2024. That's a European award. Also, we would have engaged with communities that surrounded the bogs, and we had a community day for each of the participating sites. And on the day, basically, it wasn't just farmers; it was to do with locals, and that we'd get them together, and we would have experts there on the day to tell them the benefits of peatlands and how lucky people were to actually live near these special areas and the conservation that they could do. In fact, many of the groups that participate in the project, they also had projects going on their local bogs, including Umeras, which I'm part of. So field trips and public engagement. So between 2021 and 2024, FarmPEAT presented and shared at info stands, hosted field trips for about 50 groups. So on the top right-hand corner, you see Caroline at the Ploughing Championship, and Teagasc and Catherine Keena in particular very kindly facilitated us hosting our FarmPEAT in there. Jonathan Cathal, one of our farmers, presenting a conference in Athlone. And just to see our engagement with farming organisations, on the bottom left, it was a visit from the IFA, and the bottom right is a visit from the ICMSA to our sites to see what dams look like when they're in operation. And I suppose of all the trips that were involved, and I got the plum trip in bottom centre, I got to go to Berlin to present at the Restoring Defence and their economic potential. So that was memorable. Okay, so publicity and publications. We were very active on social media with a couple of posts each week to keep people up to date on what was happening in the project. We gave interviews on radio, on TV. Caroline was interviewed on Ear to the Ground, and there were articles on the project in the Journal and Agriland as the project went along. During the course of the project, we also produced 5 newsletters to keep all our farmers up to date on everything peat. So I think basically that's it. It's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Bernie, that was super. And Caroline, thanks a million as well. 2 super presentations. I actually thought some of your slides are really good, and especially that Amazon one, it really resonated with me. And so, some of the way they're explaining stuff is so important, because we're all from farming backgrounds, and unless it's explained in practical terms, it means nothing to us. So I thought it was brilliant. Just one thing, I suppose, Bernie, I come to you first because you're kind of talking about most recently. Any of these projects, and we've been involved in many of them over the years, and when you come with something different to a farming area, that's something quite different to what they're doing for years and years, how difficult was it, or I suppose, how difficult was it to get the message in there first, to get the buy-in from the farmers? Or did you join the project helping out from the start, or did you kind of get pulled in because you bought into the whole idea of it?
Well, I was involved from the start. I think, like I said, I was involved in a community project, and we asked FarmPEAT to consider our local bog as one of their sites. I suppose I had a bit of trepidation about getting involved in a project that was promoting raising the water table on peat soils. But how the farmers were recruited, everybody was asked to join. So people turned up, they had an open mind, and they listened. Look, within the project, I think, as Caroline had said, towards the end, there were farmers actually quite comfortable to have their land, the water table brought up on their land. So it was an ongoing process. Basically, people wait and see. They're not too judgmental. Once they get into the project in the first place, they're open-minded. So I think that's half the battle.
I think the other thing as well, sorry, Bernie, the other thing was that they knew from the start there was no obligation on them to do anything. So it was all about just joining the project. The only obligation was to come to the training day. So it was all about just sharing information, and they knew there was a guaranteed payment without having to do anything. And I think that a couple of the farmers said that to us, that they were a bit wary about joining, but they knew they didn't have to do anything. So they just joined out of interest to see what was going on and keep up to date as well.
You must have done something a bit stronger though, because just looking at some of I love, you really know if you're doing well or not when you see the farmer comments at the end, and you put up a couple, Bernie, I think, and it looked like the farmers in the area really bought in, because sometimes we can get caught up in just doing something for payments, but it looks like there's a bit more going on here. They're really bought into what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, it was. I suppose it was probably varied. There was more buy-in from some farmers than others, as would happen anywhere. But I think as well from the feedback we got from the farmers, they really appreciated that there was staff on the ground to go out and meet them in their own farm and walk the farm and make a plan specific for their farm. It wasn't a one size fits all. And also, I think that flexibility was hugely important as well, like to see that they could set the water level themselves if they wanted to do the rewetting actions, for example. And there was, it wasn't like if you're going to do the rewetting, it has to be at the surface. It's whatever suits you. So I think a lot of that was, that's what they told us, themselves. So the flexibility, the boots on the ground and the one size fits all, and the fact that they could pick up the phone and ring us. And we were generally, if we didn't answer straight away, we'd ring them back. Well, we were generally there for them with information and advice.
Yeah, and just to remind everybody to get your questions into the Q&A, and I'm going to let you over to Catherine now in a second. Just one last question, just Caroline, what you mentioned, and maybe Bernie, I think you actually showed a slide on this, on the survey you presented. At the start, did a lot of farmers think that when you're talking about rewetting, you're talking about bringing it right up like a paddy field up to the surface? Was that the understanding on the ground?
I suppose maybe initially, but like that was made clear to them in the project from early on that if you wanted to consider this, it was at your discretion how much you wanted to raise the water table. And as Caroline said, like there was a lot of research done into each particular installation to make sure that there was no impact in terms of adjacent farms, and there was no impact in terms of the farm themselves, that he could actually continue on farming as he had been.
Yeah. Catherine, loads of questions coming through.
Yeah, and can I first say, Cathal, there's a huge interest this morning in this topic, and what I noticed more than ever is the number of people joining as the word got out. I think people were saying, listen, they're on, and look at them. And I've had a few messages even, is it been recorded? So just to reiterate to anybody who may have missed any or know of other people who are interested, that these are all recorded, and on the same link that you click on, they will be up within a few days, and the podcast that you mentioned earlier, Cathal, but just in case, to reiterate that it's there forever, which I find very useful for people as a reference. And just the second general comment, I've been involved in this project from the beginning, and what I particularly love about this one is the link between the biodiversity and the habitat and the carbon. It's possibly, and Caroline has reassured me, what I've learned so much is that if the habitat is right and if it's scoring well, it's good for carbon, and I think, Cathal, we know it's good for water too. So it's never been as clear to me as the 10 out of 10 score is also good for carbon. I think that's what you've really, really shown here. And again, while I have one question there that I'll answer because it's asked about, you may wish to add to it, but any research on peatlands in the west and the northwest. And can I direct people to in the series of webinars where John Connolly from Trinity College in Dublin is talking about our hidden peatlands. So Charlie and others will be very interested in that one. Caroline may have a comment on other research going on. And again, another question then before I hand over was about how the project learnings get rolled out. So I think this is a very good example of how we roll out. We're helping doing our bit. But Caroline, the following question is, will the farming participants be able to continue their good work?
I suppose there's no similar project or a directly follow-on project in place at the moment. Some of our farmers, we directed them to it's kind of a different focus, but another project run by NPWS in the Midlands at the moment. It's called Toker. So some of our farmers, I think, are maybe participating in that. We're hoping the Department of Agriculture obviously was leading this. So they are, as far as I know, they're intending on having a follow-on project called Midlands Carbon Catchment Study. But there's no date at the moment. We don't know when that's going to happen. But I think there's so much, we've so many targets in our climate action plan and European targets. I think it's going to be happening at some point.
In some point. A couple of specific projecty ones. How were the supporting actions verified?
Verified in terms of
check that they were done.
Oh yeah. So I suppose again, boots on the ground. In general, we did a site visit. The odd one might have been enough to send in a photograph, but we were so involved, like with the plans and the implementation throughout. We would have generally been on site in essence.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose that's the thinking of rolling it out onto a bigger scale is relevant there. And the question about the 500,000 paid out to farmers, what was the total cost of, what was your budget in total
Um,
and everything?
Very good question. So we were a 2-year project at the start, and we got 1.2 million to run the project, and then we got an extension for 1 year with an additional 606,000. So I can't
Yeah,
do the
good
sums
sum.
there, but yeah, 1.8. That was it. It was about 1.8 million. That.
Yeah, no, that's good. When damming or increasing water levels, do you consider causing issues for neighbouring farms?
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of the first thought of the farmer in the farmer's head and our head as well. You know that we know if you slow the flow of water in a drain and that drain is flowing through neighbouring landowners, you're going upstream, it's going to potentially have an impact. So it was always considered. That's where we would have gotten the expertise input from RPS hydrologists. That's where they would have done that depression analysis model, and they'd have come to the site and taken levels and everything. I mean, it was very thoroughly, to the best of our ability, it was done. If there was a potential impact on a neighbouring landowner, we approached them and discussed it with them. If they were willing to go ahead, like that example I showed, we just modified the plan and took out a few dams and, kept everyone happy.
And for that land where the water table was raised, was there any analysis or perceived differences in the land trafficability when the water rose, let's say from 70 to 30 centimetres?
Yeah, so again, I suppose it's a relatively new area. These are all trial farms. So in general, we found that the farmers who were uptaking these actions they were putting in the dams in areas where they didn't expect it to be a huge change because maybe the land was quite wet anyway. It was just making it that little bit wetter. We would expect that in most cases, the land would still be farmable for at least some of the year. We might be reducing that time on the shoulders. Maybe in the spring you mightn't be letting your cattle out as early, and in the autumn you might have to bring them in a bit sooner, etc. I think in that particular example that I had, the depression analysis model, there was one field there and it looked like it was going to be pretty much very, very wet, but the farmer was just happy with that. It just suited his particular situation.
And have you any figures on stocking rates on the drain blocked peat plots or the fields? Any change maybe even in stocking rates, or did you make up by grazing the grass in the middle of the summer, as you say, other than the shoulders of
Yeah, I suppose we don't have any strong data on it, to be honest. Some of the dams went in 2023, but some of the dams only went in late last year. So probably a bit too early to say. I know the one that went in 2023, there wasn't much change in farming practices there at all.
Yeah. Okay. The usual topic of double payments. Some of these farmers were in acres, or were they? And how did you deal with that?
Yeah, so we had at the start, actually, a lot of the farmers would have been in gloss and then acres as well. And I suppose the onus was on us then to see, was there a risk of double payments? And obviously, you can't allow that. So we would have done a kind of an analysis of what we were paying for and compared that to what acres or gloss was paying for and identified where there was overlap. And we would have just amended the payments then. So, for example, in acres, the easiest one was anything that was being scored using a results-based system. That was considered 100% overlap, so we couldn't pay on it because it was already being scored by acres and paid there. There was other ones that it was a 40% overlap or 20% overlap, and we just amended the payments then.
Okay, back to methane. With the raising of the water table, there will be an increase in methane levels while there will be a decrease in carbon emissions. Does the public need to be aware of this possibility, as farming could get the blame for increasing methane levels? So that whole methane discussion, have you?
Yeah, I suppose like if you were bringing the water level up very, very close to the surface, that's I think when your methane levels will be increasing most. But the general, as far as I understand it, the general science says that the methane will degrade relatively quickly. So, initially you're going to have an increase in methane, but over time, because you're reducing the much longer impacting carbon in the atmosphere, you're going to have an overall beneficial impact over the longer term.
I think there was a paper presented there a couple of years ago about that there's a kind of a sweet spot between, as long as you don't go too high, it's just the right amount of carbon and methane. So yeah, I think you're right there.
Carl, I'll come back to you after I just read a few very complimentary ones. Need more Carolines and more Bernies is the ultimate comment we're getting here. And very impressive presentation on the professional management of this project. And can I add to that? I really could agree with that comment. So Cathal, I'll back to you and I'll come back in a minute.
Yeah, no, but Bernie, you were showing some maps, and I know you were doing some measurements and kind of going down to see where the peat was and how much peat was there. And I think one of the maps you showed that on the maps that we look at in general, it shows that there's peat in the ground, but you were kind of deeming it that there wasn't enough organic carbon there to be peat. My question, I suppose, here is, are our maps good enough if you want to make this at a wider scale, or is there more work to be done, surveys or update our mapping?
I think there's a lot of work to be done there in terms of surveying and that. Um, in terms of what qualifies as peat, that's just a benchmark. But even what has less than 17% organic carbon is still emitting emissions. Okay, but for just definition purposes, we use the 20% mark that the EPA use. I suppose what you could say basically is there's a lot of that land that the peat is so shallow in it anyway to start with that would never be considered for re-wetting. It wouldn't be possible to do it without impacting mineral soils beside it. But absolutely, surveying I think is the way to go. And I suppose there's lots of technical ways being drawn up to try and survey the land, but none of them seem to work so far. Basically, the most accurate way to do it is go out with your probe and take the depth and take the soil samples as well.
Yeah, and I suppose Teagasc have done a lot of work over soil sampling across the country in years, and Ireland are very good for that, and our analysis as well. So it might be something we keep an eye on. Just on the practical side of things, Bernie, you're a farmer there, and I'm sure your friends are there as well. Your local farmers. When you're raising the water tables to the different levels, how is it affecting farmers any bit? Anyone giving out like that there's a bit of poaching or trafficability is a bit of a problem at times of the year, or how is it impacting them?
Well, none of the farmers in the Umeras area actually raised the water table, so it was ones primarily down the west of Ireland. Yeah, that would be a concern for sure. In terms of the duration that you can actually keep your stock outside, reduces your costs. But as we're finding with climate change now anyway, that the wet periods are harder to predict. So, insofar as we can only go on in terms of the farmers who actually took these measures in the project, we didn't have any negative feedback on it.
And some of that land is probably tricky enough to manage at the best of times anyway. So maybe with the payments, you're not losing out on money maybe.
Yeah, that's the way I look at it. I look at it from a number of aspects. I look at the average age of the Irish farmer, the size of the farms that would be involved in this. And even in my own situation, I think we raised our kids too well. Most of them are gone on to get third level education. If you want them to work small farms, it'll be on a part-time basis. And in terms of the amount of time that they can actually give to the farm, if the water table was brought up and there was an extra payment there, that might suit them to take on measures like that. So, I mean, the demographic of the farmers who actually have this type of land is very important in terms of, I think, how this can be delivered going into the future.
Paul, can I just come on to this, because I think maybe in case we've been emphasising that there hasn't been too much change of practice or our problem with the farmer, and the question was, why are we doing it if we're not getting any benefit? But just to reiterate the benefit, Bernie, maybe the fact that we are saving carbon, and improving biodiversity by the re-wetting, slowing the flow of the water. Sorry, the question is, I think we were emphasising the fact that there isn't a major change in practice for farmers. So somebody says, why are we doing it? So why are we doing it, Caroline? Re-emphasise there the benefits.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, like we all know, we're in a climate crisis, a biodiversity crisis, and water quality isn't exactly where we want it to be. So like that's why we're focusing on this. If you can, as Bernie presented in one of his slides, if you can raise the water table by 10 centimetres on peat soils, you're reducing your carbon emissions by 3 tonnes per hectare per year. If it's wetter, it's more likely to have the biodiversity associated with wet grasslands, and the water is flowing more slowly. It's, you know, dropping sediments, it's settling, it's not going to carry sediment away as quickly and pollutants, etc. So it's you know, that's really why we're doing it. And really the payments are to pay the farmer for this service. You know, it's an alternative source of income.
So huge benefits, just in case, yeah. And what you mentioned there about the water and the sediment and slowing the flow, any issues with water quality with raised NNP levels? Or Cathal, you might be able to, why would anybody even think there might be?
The more often kind of ammonium issues we associate maybe with peatlands, but yeah, but for raising it, I couldn't see overland flow issues. Maybe with I suppose if you're raising the water table, the land is going to be wetter, that you might get runoff, all right, at some stations. But it's a little bit different for peatland because it holds water a bit differently than mineral soils.
Okay, and a nice one to add to that then is, will this help remedy the flooding? In the sense of, will it help water regulation on the wider countryside scale, wider land scale, and will it help flooding, Caroline?
Yeah, I suppose, you know, if it was done on a big scale, and especially if the raising of the water table around the edges of the high bog was helping the high bog itself to store that water better as it would have done naturally, it should definitely help with water regulation.
It releases it slower, isn't that it?
Absolutely.
Following on from the Pearl Mussel project.
Just on that, actually, when you have the water quality up there, there's loads of, I come from water quality background, so there's live seed, there's loads of cattle access points and loads of good work coming in. One thing that we've come across in the asset program is when we're doing anything with culverts, or I see you have some dams and stuff going on there, did you have to consult with Inland Fisheries Ireland or local Law Pro or county councils just to make sure that the farmer wasn't getting themselves in trouble?
Yeah, there was one or two sites where we had improvement to footbridges actually, and we consulted with the local inland fisheries and Law Pro as well. Yeah.
Did you trial any wooden dams, Bernie?
No, we just didn't get around to that. It would be more cost effective than the plastic ones for sure, but you know, the durability and the long term plastic seemed to be the way to go. But you know, maybe if the project had rolled on a bit longer, we would have had the opportunity to try them.
Yeah, and a really hard one here now. Will the actions that you're talking about be eligible for carbon farming payments under the next cap? End on a really hard one.
3,000 tons per hectare.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's not up to us to decide that, but I mean, you know, I don't see why not. Some of those actions could be used for other things like carbon farming. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and again, you know, how can we make more use of the fantastic work that you've done? I suppose is coming through there a lot, and equally good work. Somebody mentioned Mount Allen Farm in Drumshanbo has done a lot of bog restoration with Queen's University, and you know, so there's a lot of interest in this space, isn't there? So what happens next, I suppose, is what would you like to see? I suppose, what would you both like to see? Maybe we'll end on that, Cathal.
Yeah, actually, can I just on that point as well, if anyone's interested in more, because it was hard to fit everything in, we will be publishing our end of project report when the department have signed off on it. But there's a summary report on our website, and our website will be hosted on Wetland Surveys Ireland as well, when, you know, after it's closed down. So there's loads of information on the website. I'd love to see the results-based approach being kept. I think it's really, really key. You know, it rewards farmers for the work they've done already. And if they're maintaining habitats in good condition, there's payments there. You know, why should it only be for improving things, I think. So I think really I love the results-based approach. I think it's fair and it works. And it's been shown to work, not just by us, but by as you mentioned, the Pearl Mussel Project, the Hen Harrier Project, the Burren Project, etc.
Yeah, I think that's sorry, Bernie, you're coming in there.
No, I would just love to see the education aspect of all this rolled out and across the schools, and for farmers to be made better aware of all the benefits that are taking place by taking on these measures. You know, it's a no-lose situation, really. I don't think.
Yeah, I think the big thing coming through there, Catherine, is that some of these projects do such brilliant work and show such good results, and then they just stop dead and they just die away. And what people are kind of coming through in the questions is, can we get it into acres or a new scheme, a Department of Agriculture scheme that can be rolled out nationwide? And look, I think you've showed loud and clear through your results that this is very, very positive. Farmers have the buy-in. It's just a win-win all around. And unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. And I thought that was a really, really good presentation and really interesting. And just want to thank everybody for submitting their questions. Some really good questions as well. And Bernie and Caroline, thank you so much for coming on. It was great to have you on, and I think you've really opened a lot of eyes to the type of work that we can be carried out for carbon sequestration and holding on to the carbon that we have already. Catherine, thanks a million. Brilliant as always for your knowledge on the question, and just want to thank Yvonne Marr as well in the background. Yvonne is the producer of the show, and she always makes sure that everything's run smoothly and manages everything in the background. And just to remind you as well, next week that we can look forward to a chat with Calvin Jones, who's founder editor of Wildlife Guide Ireland's Wildlife, and that'll be on next week, not to be missed, 9:30 next Friday. So that's it, I suppose. So please do tune in again next Friday at 9:30. But until then, we hope you have a great weekend, and slán go fóill.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.